Tonya, how are you?
Great. How are you today?
Very, very good. We got a topic that is so important, one that's not often brought up, but I'm so glad that you and I get to discuss this disability inclusion and talent acquisition as we gather today for Diversity Reboot Destigmatized. And I guess, one of the things, just in terms of language, help me, and being a journalist, I'm always interested in that part. When we think of the very topic, when we think about how to include this into what we are, the way it's included in job descriptions. So there's the, when you're listing, and then there's how do you describe who you are that fits that job description. Why don't we start with that? The job description. When it comes to hiring, how do you fit that in? What's the best way of doing that?
Great question. I think there's two answers to that, right? There's the overall bottom paragraph, right? We talk about that's overall like diversity is important to us. Please apply. Those are going to be on most of your majority of your job description. They're pretty standard. And then one thing we do is to make sure that the overall job description is inclusive. So we work with our hiring leaders to make sure that we're sticking to the qualifications and the requirement for the role. So a lot of times you'll see job descriptions written and they'll have a lot of extras, prefers, or, they don't talk about what it does to complete that job, but more of what they want from a soft skills. And so we really work on really truly bringing in the essence of the job and what is needed, no matter what your ability is outside of that job description.
And then when it comes to the flip side, the way you put that last paragraph in, what is the best way to, when you're looking at applicants and resumes and LinkedIn's, what's the best way to fit that request of the bottom paragraph that you're talking about?
So we have two that we use. One is that is directly to the job, right? So we have candidates must be able to perform essential job functions with or without reasonable accommodations. So that's one thing right there that candidates should be looking at, is that if that organization is going to offer accommodations. And then we have a broader statement where we currently have, I believe it says, diversity creates a healthier atmosphere. And that's for all diversity, right? Like, we welcome diversity within our organization. So I think those are really key things to include if you're responsible for writing that job description or within talent acquisition, that you're covering and making sure that people feel inclusive when they're applying for positions at your organization.
And let's take a step back for a second, Tonya, and let me ask you, what's been your experience over the years in this space, in talent acquisition and DEIB, relevant to what we're talking about today?
Well, I've sat in both sides within DEI and then within talent acquisition, and I've really seen the transition to be more inclusive. And so I have a invisible disability myself, and when I have to apply for this, it's really hard for me to talk about. I don't really talk about it, and so I look for that in an organization, and so I feel now more than I did even 5 years ago that I'm more open of disclosing my disability than I have in the past. So I have seen a increase in awareness and openness to say, hey, we're here to help you and accommodate, because a lot of people that don't need to disclose their disability to have a job don't disclose it. And I highly recommend you do, if you have that comfortability, at least so you can have a comfortable work environment.
Share what you feel most comfortable with, of course, you're Tonya, but how have you navigated, putting on your applicant side hat for a moment, how have you navigated what you do express about your disability? And also, how do you decide how much, depending on what the response might be at the right time, right?
At the right time. And I think that ties back into the whole talent acquisition process. So that experience you have from the beginning. I know some organizations use video interviewing, and people may not feel comfortable on video. And if there's a link there that they can reach out to say, hey, are you able to make accommodations for me where I don't need to record a video, or I can talk to someone live? Those are key things. So I think even having that comfortability from day one, and then being open with that recruiter from the beginning, because you also don't want to get yourself into a situation where you do, have a job, right? And then you're not able to get those accommodations. So really upfront about what your needs are. I know for our organization, we really, I would say, partner with our vocational rehab services across the nation. And we use them as consultants. They help our talent acquisition with wording, advise us on trending, and so we can be more open and flexible on that. And I found when I'm open from the very beginning, my experience has been better because they know what to do and how to accommodate with that.
I would think that there might be some concern, though. You're saying that the more open you are early in the process, where I'm sitting, right? I'm thinking, boy, but can you give them too much? That because there's all these stereotypes and assumptions around the entire space, right?
And I think that we need to be advocates for ourselves. So I think part of that is education, or not feeling comfortable having those conversations. And so if we can lead that from our side of the desk, that I think that's really important. From me sitting in a DEI space now, I understand that a lot of people who don't have a disability or haven't worked in that environment may be uncomfortable with those conversations or asking for that. So one thing we've done in our organization is that we have office hours available. These are for hiring leaders. These are for our talent acquisition professionals to go in each week and talk to our accommodations team. So they have someone in the process, or they have an employee that they're onboarding, that they can get those questions asked that they may not be comfortable with. So we're really trying from an organization to open up that door and have that comfortability.
Oh, such good stuff. One of the questions I want to ask is, being a POC, is what are the similarities and dissimilarities, a compare and contrast? Because you just talked about those who are not living with a disability or don't believe they are, don't understand the language and the way to approach it. Are there any parallels or anything differences that you can help us do when we think about the way we talk about communities of color or POCs?
I think so. I think there's a great parallel to that. And same thing, just the understanding, using your community resources, research. If you have the opportunity within your organization to bring in additional resources, if you don't have them internally, just to talk about this is key. And I think we have really elevated all, right, from a diversity perspective of being able to talk about this more openly. And so there's parallels there and best practices on moving forward, especially within the recruiting and talent acquisition space.
And the reason why I bring that up is, if going to the talent acquisition side of the equation, right? If an individual is not as well educated and steeped in understanding the disability community, can they draw from what they may know or learn from communities of color and candidates who are people of color, and trying to help them get over that bridge? Do you know what I mean?
Yes. And I think that bridge is sometimes with our unconscious biases, right? Because sometimes if you don't know, you avoid. And so we've really worked on really providing resources for our employees on unconscious biases.
Yes.
And looking at that from across all areas, right, of diversity, and then really inclusion. So I think we talk about these unconscious biases, but sometimes we miss that inclusion part. So we want to attract that diversity into our organizations. But when we get in there, what is our inclusion? So one thing we do for our hiring leaders, as well as we have an inclusive hiring guidelines and training that we provide to make sure that that is across the board for all of our diversity hires.
I've been following military families for the last 6 years and looking at disabilities, both seen and unseen. And I don't necessarily know the language around it, but I know the people. From a talent acquisition professional side, give me a tip about how to understand disabilities, both seen and unseen. What's the way to think about it?
Wow, that's a really good question. You know what? I think just being open, it's hard, but I think even in our recruiting for talent acquisition, we need to look for those qualities in those hires. And going back to even your experience with military, we actually have a military fellowship program here. And we focus on military with disabilities. And what it is transition. And so we work with our hiring leaders to understand how some of those skills translate into civilian skills, because again, it's unknown. Yes. And they may not know that. And so right. we have a team here. I actually have my colleague, would be great to have him on the call with me, but he focuses specifically on that, really working with our internal leaders to say, hey, this is some transferable skills. They may need additional support. And so we have mentor groups. So we bring them in as a fellow instead of putting them into a full-time job and doing that transition really quickly. So we do a fellowship program where they have some mentorship. They're able to transition those skills. We walk them through, and depending on what type of position it is, they could go from anywhere from a 10-week to a 12-month program in that transitional, and then we'd hire them onto a full-time role. So those are some things we're doing internally. We also have a disability internship program, very similar to the military, but more open to any disabilities. We again partner with our local vocational services to identify candidates for that program. And it's called the internship program, but it's really for people who may be re-entering the workforce, who are maybe transitioning work because of their disability. They may have to do some type of other work. So they were at the vocational learning additional skills. And so we actually have that as well. And again, doing those transferable skills is really helpful. So, and I know every organization doesn't have those resources available to them, but hopefully this will give them some ideas of maybe what they could do in addition to what they're doing now.
What would be, from your both personal experience and professional experience, the ways to think about physical disabilities and mental/emotional disabilities? Give us some thoughts around both of those buckets.
I think for the physical disabilities, most organizations are set up for that because we can make those accommodations if they need a desk or to move from, one thing we do have is we have prioritized flexible work schedules. So with that, we have flex on location, or if you're on-site, remote, hybrid. And so that accommodates both of those, but I think more from the physical side, where someone who wasn't able to come in to do to the office, they can do that. We just did a push on really on the mental health side of disabilities. I had an intern, and this is public information, so I'm not sharing anything proprietary, sure. But if you do go to the UnitedHealth Care LinkedIn, you will see a video, and I'm in there with my intern who has PTSD. And how we made accommodations for her, and we actually worked with her to really feel comfortable in a full-time work setting, and then was able to hire into a full-time translator role. And so again, I think it's really that education, understanding that you're able to find and be able to work with any type of place, and we just need to find the right location and the right person.
Yeah, because the stereotypes and the misunderstandings about when it comes to mental and emotional disabilities is that it is all one side, like you're completely incapacitated 100% of the time. And it's like a 0 or 100%, right? And that's true of many in our disability community, that's the view, and that we have so much education culturally. And seeing a video, strangely enough, as simple as that is, it's a story, it's people, right, that you were in, Tonya, along with your intern, trying to show that we all live in very intersectional ways, and this is just one part of it. God, if you don't mind, I'm going to dig into some of these questions because they're coming in. Is that all right, Tonya? We'll just take them as we go, and I'll also ask you some questions in between.
Sure, great.
All right. Raquel says, has your disability ever caused you a problem in your position? And how did you address that?
It did, and I know Raquel, and she knows my disability. So I actually had lost my voice, and I don't have a vocal cord. And so I wasn't able to speak. Mm-hmm. And I speak now all the time and in my roll call for that. And it was very difficult to make that transition. And I had to look for a role that I was able to accommodate that until I was able to rehab. And even now I have a role where I need to take breaks and not able to speak a lot. Mm. And so I feel that it was hard to disclose that because I felt like I wasn't going to be accepted as a candidate for a role because I needed to take breaks during the day for my voice. I may not be able to speak at some points, in time. But I wanted to work for an organization and for a leader who was accepting of that. So I had to be out of my comfort zone to share that information to make sure that I was getting the accommodations that I needed. And that was really hard. So anybody out there listening, that was an easy task. I'm willing to work with someone who needs to do that, who needs to do a transition or put talking points together to disclose accommodations that are needed.
Thank you for sharing that, Tonya. I want to go to TND MBAND. And this kind of harkens back to our earlier questions. What responsibility falls on the organization for educating employees and managers instead of looking to those with disabilities to be the ones spearheading the education initiative? And I was just thinking that because often, when I'm talking about stuff related to AEPIs, I have to be like the expert on it, which I'm not. And I think ND is saying the very same thing. What is the responsibility of an organization to educate employees and their forward or outward facing folks to understand the space versus the person living with a disability being the individual that has to, be the perfect spokesperson on it?
Right, because I can see that's a lot to take on, to be the spokesperson for all disabilities, because I'm not that, right? So I again think it's a joint responsibility. I feel that everybody's unique in their role in this, and their accommodations needed, and their disability, and we all have stories. So I think telling your story also educates everybody. Mm-hmm. But then on the other side, the organizations also need to take that approach, like we talked about before, offering training, being open, seem like, hey, we're able to make accommodations for you. So I think it's a combination of both.
And a part of that, what Steph is asking here is, how do you get candidates like yourself comfortable? You were just kind of describing that, where you can say, I would like to consider the discussion about accommodations. But let's go straight to it. What is the way that talent acquisition departments and activities can be more understanding to make it comfortable for a person living with a disability to enter into the conversation?
Richard, I think that's a great question. And I'm just speaking in general here, but I think we're still learning that. I think we've come a long way, but I still think we have a long way to go. And again, it puts it back into that person with a disabilities lab to be educated on that, or educating everyone else on that. And so I feel that organizations are trying to do better and to be better. And that you want to work for someplace that's doing that. And so even doing a little bit of research on what they have out there, like we talked about at the beginning, on what do they do, what do they have on their job descriptions? Do they even have anything on their job descriptions about, accommodations or diversity or everyone's welcome here? I think those are key areas to start, and organizations need to start there, as well as just being out there and saying, hey, we want to talk to you.
I'm no expert here, Tonya, but I would say live it, breathe it, as an organization. Is it in your,
Yes.
do I see it when I look at what you do? Are
Yes.
are the people held up high representing that space, right? Are they part of the conversations that we're having in every corner? And sometimes you'll look at Marcom stuff and you'll go, well, like it says this, but I'm not seeing that, right? Picture's
Yeah.
worth 1,000 words. I mean, these
It
are
is.
baby steps, right, Tonya? These are baby steps.
Yes. And you're exactly right. And like I said, with even the video out with us sharing our story with my intern is a big step in the right direction that I think we need to do more of, and we need to
Yeah,
see more of.
exactly. And it's not like we use the word normalization or mainstreaming. We have to be careful. I'm not saying that.
Mhm.
That's not the words I'm using. I'm talking about let's see them as part of the team, right? Okay, that's a whole
Yes.
different session here with PowerToFly, which we'll have on another time. Tune in. No, I'm joking. So give me a sentence or a word that, as a talent acquisition professional, what I might be able to use to be more accommodating, to enter into that conversation in a comfortable way with a person living with a candidate living with a disability.
I think language that we use during that process, and some things that we've been able to do for coaching wise, is that we recommend that the recruiters ask, is there anything additional that we need to do to make you successful in this role? Leaving that open to whatever they want to share. And then even at the next step, say you do get hired and you're having that initial conversation with your hiring leader, we ask the hiring leaders to ask, like, in addition to, say, technology or computer, or, here's what I have for you, is there anything else that you need to be successful in this role? And so we're trying to have that open conversation and give them that opportunity to share what they need, what they want or need.
One more bite at this apple. Is there a question in a job description or a word in a job description that you like to use to show that you are thinking of those candidates living with a disability?
That's a good question. I think there's multiple words. I would say, if we're using, focused right on these skills and the skills that are required for the job, I think that's a key thing. And as we talked about before, is that, reasonable accommodations, diversity is welcome here, like seeing those type of things and them sticking to a very, focused on the skills job is really helpful, where they give you the summary of their overall team,
Yeah.
maybe the overall project, and then here's the basic skills we need to do this job.
Yeah.
I think that's key.
I mean, could you even go as far as, and we're down to 2 minutes, could you even go as far as saying, we would absolutely like to, paraphrasing, we would encourage a discussion if you're a candidate living with a disability? Would you actually say something like that? I mean, that's a little non-job description-y stuff, but
it is. And I have not seen that yet, but I would welcome that if I had my own company, not speaking for anybody else, but yes, I think that, diverse in thought and experiences is key.
Yeah.
To making it, the world successful. So yes.
All right. Then on the flip side, because when you put that in a job description, then your folks that are outward facing, they better be ready, and
Yes.
they better be tuned up, as you might say. In the minute we got left, how do we get tuned up if we're a talent professional and we're trying to be ready for that conversation?
I think the first thing is listening. So make sure you're listening and not making assumptions. So they may say have a disability, and you want to listen to what that is, what those accommodations are, ask key questions. That's the key. Have those conversations, Most companies have an accommodations team. Bringing it to the accommodations team the information you have gathered, so you can make an overall, good recommendation on what's needed instead of making assumptions or not say anything at all because you don't feel comfortable.
And you can also go to PowerToFly to get more updates and information about how to address this topic if you are a talent professional. And Tonya, thank you so much. I look forward to us being able to hang out again and dig more into this topic. And I really appreciate you sharing your personal journey along the way here with us, because I know that none of us have the right to that, but you gave us some of that. So thank you, Tonya.
Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
You too. Meg, back to you, my friend.